Here's the guy on Capitol Hill today, the man of the hour, Kurt Volker, career diplomat, happens to be a John McCain ally, our former point man in Ukraine who resigned days ago, and that nicely freed him up to become a very interesting closed-door witness today, and he did so for over 9 hours. Democrats wanted his story because it was the first inside account of all the actions that led to the whistleblower complaint. And to recap what we learned through reporting, the U.S. government pushed Ukraine to look into the Bidens, and the U.S. envoy warned Rudy Giuliani that Ukraine was feeding him bad info. Then there's the Washington Post report on another key figure in the complaint. According to them, quote, President Trump ordered the removal of our ambassador to Ukraine after months of complaints from allies outside the administration, including his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, that she was undermining him abroad and obstructing efforts to persuade Kiev to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden, according to people familiar with the matter. In Mr. Giuliani's view, she had also been an obstacle to efforts to push Ukraine to investigate Mr. Biden and his son Hunter. And this is what the president had to say about our former ambassador earlier today.
Why did you recall the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine? Was she a problem? Why did you recall her?
I heard very bad things about her. And I don't know if I recalled her or somebody recalled her, but I heard very, very bad things about her for a long period of time.
Back with us tonight, we are so happy to have Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia. And Ambassador, let me start with the start. The only reason we know any of this, in addition to the existence of the whistleblower complaint, is that phone call in July. Seems to me about half the West Wing payroll was listening in on a dead key to that phone call, including our Secretary of State. How rare is that?
Well, in my experience, extremely rare. I worked for 3 years at the White House, prepped many phone calls with foreign leaders, including the leaders of Russia. Never was the Secretary of State on the call. And also, always was the National Security Advisor on the call or in the Oval Office. We usually were in the Oval Office. In this case, Mr. Bolton was not. And in addition, the Vice President's National Security Advisor, General Kellogg, was on the call, not the National Security Advisor. So that is extremely unusual.
And why do you think such a vast array of people were listening in on a telephone call?
Because of the content of the call. And we're now learning. It just dropped, Brian, while I was waiting to go on TV with you. So I was just scrolling through it. But we have a lot of information now that was just released about texts between Ambassador Volker, between our EU ambassador. Goodness knows why he is involved in any of this, by the way. And it is not just this phone call. We now know that they were prepping the phone call, and the quid pro quo is clear as day in these texts. The quid pro quo is not only do you need to open an investigation, Mr. Zelensky, but you need to put it on the record that you are going to do this investigation. Oh, and you need to also put it on the record that you are going to expose what Ukraine did in interfering in the 2016 elections. Extraordinary stuff that just dropped a few minutes ago. But it shows that it's a much bigger story. It wasn't just an off-the-cuff remark that the president, as he sometimes does, as you and I know. This was all calculated. And then the next day, we have a delegation there. Mr. Volker himself is in Ukraine to try to follow up on what the president said in that call.
To your point just then and there, our mutual friend Susan Glasser writes for The New Yorker, says something along the lines of what you just said. Reading tonight's late-night info dump from the Ukraine affair, make no mistake. Rudy Giuliani was placed in charge of Ukraine policy, and diplomats desperate to get Trump to meet with the Ukraine president had to go through him. This is a shadow foreign policy in text form. Ambassador, indeed, what is the danger of having a guy like Rudy Giuliani, former mayor of New York, who is flying around the world with permission, if not with portfolio?
Well, it's completely crazy. Let's be honest. He's the president's personal lawyer. He does not do foreign policy, and it's obvious that his only mission here is to get dirt on the Bidens and to put together this cockamamie story that the Ukrainians were involved in interference in 2016, not Vladimir Putin. But it's worse than that, Brian, because these diplomats And they're both political appointees, by the way. The EU ambassador, he is a Trump supporter. He's not a professional diplomat. They're not career diplomats. Ambassador Volker, who I know well, was also a political appointee in this job. They are working with Giuliani. They are working this. They are part of what is going on here. And I think so far, let's see what we learn, but in these texts today, the real hero is the acting ambassador, Bill Taylor, a person who I know well in Ukraine, who says in these texts, if we are going to do a quid pro quo, security assistance, military assistance for a political favor for the president, I'm not part of that. And he says, I quit. That's what everybody should have said when they heard about this crazy scheme.
Finally, your reaction to hearing the President of the United States ask China, our number one information and economic adversary, certainly, ask China to investigate the Bidens.
Well, as you were saying earlier, again, we don't really need any more information. The president keeps doing things you're not supposed to do, asking foreign governments to interfere in our elections. But it's worse than that, Brian. He's handing them leverage. He's now saying this is more important to me than any trade deal. And if you do this favor for me, I'll do you a favor on the other side. It's just a terrible way to conduct foreign policy. And he doesn't have the national security interests of the United States of America first and foremost in his mind. The only thing he's thinking about is re-election and getting dirt on the Bidens.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.